Okay, once the installation is complete and I'm happy with the results, I can close the dialog box, and that takes me back here to the SQL Server Installation Center. And this is where I can directly go to download and install SQL Server Management Tools, specifically SQL Server Management Studio, as well as SQL Server Data Tools. Now, these aren't included on the installation media, again, because Microsoft is updating these out of band with the regular SQL Server. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on that link. That'll open up my default browser and take me to the download page. Maximize that window, and I can come down here and download SQL Server Management Studio, in this case 17.1. When you run this, it's probably going to be a different version, but it's generally going to be the same process, at least throughout the lifetime of SQL Server 2016. And notice that you can also download an upgrade package if you already have version 17.0 installed. This is a pristine installation of Windows 10. Well, it's not really pristine anymore because I've installed SQL Server 2016, but I don't have Management Studio installed. So I'm going to go ahead and download this version right there. I'll save it, and it'll take a few moments to download, depending on the speed of your connection. Okay, it's downloaded, and it's running the security scan. All right, so at this point, I'm reasonably safe to go ahead and run it directly. So I'll click on Run, and I'll minimize the browser window there, as well as that window. And there's the splash screen for the installation for Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. I'll click on Install. And it'll load the packages and proceed with the installation. So like most Microsoft installation packages, particularly in the Visual Studio world, it'll give you progress for the downloads as well as the overall progress and the package installation. And there you can see where it's installing the Microsoft Visual Studio 2015 shell, because Management Studio, the current version of Management Studio, is built using that version of 2015, just the shell part. So by installing this on a machine that doesn't already have some edition of Visual Studio installed, all I'm getting is the shell with enough features as well as the project types to be able to create BI applications or business intelligence applications, as well as databases for SQL Server 2016, as well as other editions of SQL Server. Okay, so it's basically done with installation. As you can see, it requires a restart to complete installation. Strictly speaking, because I'm going to install another requirement that's going to require a restart, I could hit the close button and continue on with that other installation, but sometimes there's interference between the two, and I'll start the other installation and say there's a restart pending and so forth. So I'm just going to go ahead and restart the computer now. Okay, here we are back in Windows. So I'll go ahead and click on Windows Explorer and come back down to the installation medium and start up Setup again. Now it looks like it's running. Okay, there it is. And go back to the Installation tab here. So I've completed this step to install Management Studio. Now I'm going to install SQL Server Data Tools. So I'll click on that, and once again I go to a web page where I can download that installation. Okay, and as you can see, this is also based on Visual Studio 2015. I don't necessarily need to install the Data Tier Application Framework, but if I want to do additional things with SQL Server Data Tools, I could do that as well. I'm not going to do that here. So I'll click on the Download the SQL Server Data Tools, and I'll save that to my Downloads folder. And as you can see, that's a very quick download. In this case, it's much quicker than Management Studio, and the reason is that SSDT Setup is just a stub installation program. It's going to need to download during installation the components that it actually needs to grab from Microsoft servers, but in this case it's because some of the components may have already been installed. And in particular, it's going to depend on whether or not Visual Studio is installed already. At this point, I do have Management Studio installed, which is based on the Visual Studio 2015 shell. So I have some of the components downloaded. So the good news is that during installation, I'm not going to need to install everything had I not had Management Studio already installed. Okay, so I'll go ahead and directly run it. It's had the chance to run the security. Minimize the browser. And as you can see, here's the Microsoft SQL Server Data Tools installation. And again, it's based on Visual Studio 2015. SQL Server tends to use the current stable version of Visual Studio for its tools. And apparently version 2015 was the stable version at the time that Microsoft was developing this. Of course, we've been through at least a couple new versions of Visual Studio, and later versions of SQL Server will take advantage of those later versions. Okay, and I can select, I always need to install the SQL Server database tools. And then I can opt to install all or any of the BI components, analysis services, reporting services, and integration services. And as usual, there's a couple of links to get more information about this installation. I'm going to install everything, so I'll click on Next. I'll agree to the license terms. If I really want to review them, I can scroll down, call my attorney, and review them with me. But I'm just going to go ahead and click on Install. Okay, and as usual, I get this nice progress dialog box. It doesn't really tell me, well, it kind of indicates how much longer I have to go. But the download is going to depend, of course, on the speed of my connection. I'm on a decently speedy connection here. And then it gives me an idea of how the installation is progressing. And so this is another good chance to go get your adult caffeine-based beverage of choice or refresh your cup and come back and watch it do all this work for you. All right, so SQL Server Data Tools, the installation is successful. So I'm going to go ahead and restart again. Okay, I've restarted and everything is installed. So I can come down here to the Windows Start menu and scroll down to Microsoft SQL Server 2016. Everything should be in there. And actually, Management Studio is not. Let's see where we are. Okay, so there's Management Studio. So I can go ahead and click on that to start that. And there's the splash screen. And because this is the first time I'm running this, that's a Visual Studio thing, the MEF components, as well as loading some user settings. So it takes a little bit longer to run this the first time I run the new version. And there's the main window, and I can connect to server. I'll just go ahead and use the machine name. And there's my instance of SQL Server that I've newly installed on this machine. It doesn't have any user databases yet, although it has some system databases, but this instance of SQL Server is all set and ready to go. And then I can also come back down here to the Program menu. And notice here, I went past that a moment ago. Notice because Windows includes this recently added, I can directly go here to SQL Server Data Tools. But first what I'm going to do is something I almost always do on a new installation of these tools is I'll right-click on this and pin it to the taskbar, and right-click on that and pin that to the taskbar as well so that they're available down here. And that way they're easily accessible because these are tools that I use constantly on most installations of SQL Server, at least the client machines where I'm going to work with SQL Server, whether it's a SQL Server instance on this local machine or on a remote machine. And then because this is Visual Studio, which is almost infinitely configurable, I can define development settings. Typically, if I'm going to be using this machine for BI applications, I'll go ahead and select the BI settings here, because this just sets up the workspace a little bit more conveniently for working with SQL Server applications. And then I can choose my color theme. I prefer the dark theme. There's a couple others you can use, and you can also customize. One thing about Visual Studio which SQL Server Data Tools is built on, is that it's almost infinitely customizable. Okay, so I'll go ahead and start Visual Studio. It does take a few moments anyway, for it to start. I think that's a little bit pessimistic there. But it does take a few moments for it to start the first time. And then it still is a little bit slow to start up, but much faster the next time. Okay, and there's the Visual Studio shell. It opens up the SQL Server Object Explorer. This is one of the windows that is automatically created, mainly because I selected that BI setting. And so this makes it easier to access. This is the part of SQL Server Data Tools that is a minor substitute for Management Studio. So if you're a developer, you're creating a new project, you need to go in and quickly change some object on SQL Server, oftentimes you can do that here within the SQL Server Object Explorer window without firing up Management Studio. So whatever is appropriate for your way of working with the database. The other thing I want to show you here is File, New, Project. And because this is SQL Server Data Tools that I've installed on a pristine installation of SQL Server, didn't have the full version of Visual Studio installed, all I can do here is work with SQL Server related databases and projects. Okay, so I'm not going to get into those project types here, but basically I can create different projects that define database objects as well as BI or business intelligence objects within Visual Studio or within SQL Server Data Tools. So it's a very nice set of tools, particularly if you're a developer, but admins, sysadmins, DBAs will get some value out of SQL Server Data Tools as well.